and it's getting hotter as the day wears on. But if you look at the title of the session we are having, it's going to be a lot more hotter by the end of the session. The discipline of history in contemporary India is practically a battlefield. And one of the most dangerous combat zones is the legacy of Tipu Sultan. Religious bigot or an endower of temples, freedom fighter or a collaborator with the French, progressive administrator or a superstitious weakling, a military strategist or a prey to charlatans. The binaries around the figure of Tipu Sultan are controversial and deeply polarizing. It is the stuff of electoral campaigns with very often disastrous results, riots and sometimes deaths. To take on Tipu Sultan as the subject of a biography in contemporary India is a very daunting task. Vikram Sampath belongs to a new breed of young historians who are not shackled by the ideological frameworks of the recent past. Going back to original documents and laying them before the reader without the interpretative help of dogmas or labels, and focusing on areas which have earlier been ignored by mainstream narratives. They have been taking on establishment historians in new and exciting ways. Vikram Sampath has taken some of the most controversial and most neglected characters in recent Indian history and written biographies that have reviewers reaching out for words like monumental and magisterial. Today he is here with us to talk about his latest work, a very daunting but also very enthralling, almost 1,000-page biography of the Tiger of Mysore. Vikram Sampath, welcome to the Mathrubhumi International Festival of Letters.
Thank you, Dr. Nagesh. Thank you so much, everyone. A very good afternoon and always a pleasure to speak in Kerala.
The biography of Tipu Sultan, as many of you might probably know, is one of the more fascinating obsessions of contemporary historians as far as Vikram is concerned. It goes back to his childhood and the way he saw the TV series, The Sword of Tipu Sultan, and how his interest in the Vodiyars was ignited by that. He went on to write a definitive history of the entire dynasty. But then we also know that because of that, his mother made him promise that he would never speak or write about Tipu Sultan again. So tell us how you broke your promise to your mother.
Well, in a very perverse manner, I think I owe my literary career to Tipu Sultan because, as you mentioned, I think I was a boy of 12 or 13 years of age when Sword of Tipu Sultan, that very famous serial, was coming on television. Doordarshan, the only channel that we all saw. And to showcase Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, his son, in a glorifying light, the Maharajas of Mysore, the Vodiyars, they were shown in a very poor light. If some of you who've seen that serial remember, the Maharaja was shown like this obese retard who was dancing along with the court dancer. The Maharani was one of those typical, vamps from an Ekta Kapoor serial, constantly conniving and conspiring against Tipu. And the part of southern Karnataka that I come from, which has been a part of the erstwhile Mysore state, this upset the apple cart in many ways because, the people of South Karnataka still hold the Vodiyars in a lot of regard and reverence for the numerous achievements and the foundations of modern Karnataka that was laid during their regime. And if you remember, there was also a fire that broke out in the premier studio in Mysore where this shooting was happening. And I think Sanjay Khan's face was also burned down in that. And a lot of Kannada media in my city was saying this is the curse of the Vodiyar for showing him in the light that they had. Now, as a young boy of 12 or 13, who I must confess hated history in school, I just hated the manner in which we had to mug up who succeeded whom, which era, which war was fought in which, on which date. I dutifully used to be found kneeling down outside class almost in every history lesson. But for someone like this, I don't know what that serial, the protests, all these superstitious talks did. And that's why I set out on a mission. It was a completely self-initiated, self-motivated, and more importantly, self-funded project to go to Mysore, find out initially only about that one king and queen who were misrepresented. And then slowly the interest expanded to the entire dynasty, as you said. The Wadiyars were among the longest reigning royal houses of India, 600 years that they ruled from 1399 to 1947, with a 40-year interregnum, the subtitle of the book. Certainly not inspired by the MP of this place, who's also been kind enough to give an endorsement, not inspired by him to use a word which no one can understand or pronounce. Interregnum, in short, meaning an interval or an intermission where a regular government is overthrown and usurpation happens. So in those 40 years, Hyder Ali and Tipu had taken on the throne of Mysore. So as part of that project, it was more of, over 10 years, I started gathering a lot of information about the Wadiyars. And then it was quite intriguing to me to know that in modern times, not a single book had been written about these people. There's a very famous quote attributed to Toni Morrison, who says, if there is a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you must be the first one to write it. So that is how quite accidentally my first book, Splendors of Royal Mysore, came about. Now, but in that, those 40 years were of great enigma, great interest to me as it is to everyone else, because that is when I think the history of India changed in those 40 years. And I wanted to delve deeper into that era. But again, lots of things happened during that time where I was giving talks in various places in Bangalore and outside. And probably I was 26, 27 when that book came. I didn't know the landmines and sharks that abound in the world of Indian historiography. In Bangalore, there was a talk I was giving about the interregnum period and actually reading out Tipu's own letters, no interpretation, just his own letters to his commanders, where he's asking them to go to Malabar, to Calicut, and gloats that I have converted 4 lakh infidels in Calicut, destroyed so many churches, temples, or whatever. So while I was reading, a section of the audience, which was civilized till then, suddenly broke in protests, and paper rockets were thrown at the stage, and the lecture was called off. The poor organizers had to take me backstage. And my father was sitting in the first row, and somebody came from the audience and gave a letter to him, pamphlet, some Tipu fan club or some such thing. Said, you have an only son, and if you want him to live long enough, please ask him to zip it and mind what he talks. And my bad luck, a few weeks later, a newspaper in Bangalore, they'd asked me to write a series on the divans of Mysore. And it started with Purnaya, who has a very curious, relationship both with Hyder, Tipu, and the later Wadiyars. Now, in that, there was some reference to Tipu, and that again caused a great furor in Bangalore. Outside the newspaper office, some protesters had gathered, and they demanded an apology from me. I said, over my dead body, I'm not giving an apology, because whatever I've written is backed by facts. And the editor of that newspaper was happy to give them double the space that they'd given me to rebut me intellectually. But obviously that was not the motive. You had to do something to show that you have protested. So an effigy of mine was burnt in MG Road in the heart of the city. Of course, the editor sent that photo to me, and for a long time, that was my Orkut profile picture, because I thought it's good, all the bad omens are removed by this exercise. But my mother, who kept very poor health, she didn't take it as a joke. She got very, scared about all this, and she literally made me take a promise that in future, I will never talk or write about Tipu Sultan anywhere. I kept the promise to her, but unfortunately, I lost her in 2018. And I thought once the promise given to someone, if that person is not around, even the promise is invalid. So I broke the promise and decided to write this tome. It was 15 years of lot of suppressed emotions, lot of material that had been gathered, and that spilled over about 950 pages of this new book.
Hopefully there won't be any paper rockets this time, I hope. You spend...
Now I'm quite immune to paper rockets and even real rockets sometimes.
We'll come to the rockets later. We'll come to Tipu's rockets later. You spend a third of your book writing about Hyder Ali, and you seem to have a certain kind of admiration for him in spite of his cruelties, deceptions, and the way he created his state. So how do you compare Hyder Ali with Tipu Sultan? And there's also the question of, has historians been unfair to Hyder Ali? Because we always see Hyder as Tipu's father, and even your book is called Tipu Sultan, not Hyder Ali and Tipu. So,
Well, the subtitle Interregnum and the period 1760 to 1799 indirectly gives some credit to Hyder. But you're right. I mean, he's not a well-known figure, I think, across India. Though ideally, I don't admire him, but then I'm quite amazed by his realpolitik and strategy. Now, this was a young boy who was part of the, his father was in the service of the Nawab of Sira. And when the boy was about 4 years old, the father dies in battle. And he has an elder brother who's 8 years old, Shehbaz. And the father owed some money to some debtors. So to get that money back, these people come to their house and ransack the house, loot everything that is there. And these two boys, 4-year-old Haider and 8-year-old Shehbaz, are put inside a kettle drum or a nagada and beaten on. They almost faint. And in that situation, their mother, Majida Begum, she runs away to Srirangapatna, the capital of the Wadiyars, and pleads with the Maharaja for mercy. Now, the Maharaja takes pity on the fatherless children, pays off those debtors, and also makes a promise that when they come of age, they will be taken into the Mysorean army. Now, little did he know what he was getting into. And he kept his promise. So, Hyder makes his first entry into the Mysore firmament in the Battle of Devanhalli in 1749. But between 1749 and 1760, just 11 years, this man, Machiavellian, running with the hare, hunting with the hounds, probably putting all our modern politicians to shame. The kind of, diplomatic alliances he does, the ends always mattered, the means never did. That kind of situation he creates, and at the end of it, he manages to usurp the throne of his own benefactor. And he becomes the Sarvadhikari, or a supreme dictator of Mysore. So for me, Dr. Nagesh, I thought to understand Tipu, you need to keep Hyder as a foil. Someone who rose from rags to riches story, literally, built an empire with all, hard work, deceit, cunningness, all of this, which is part of realpolitik, and hands over that kingdom to his son. Now, the son who gets it all on a silver plate squanders it away due to his arrogance, due to his hubris, due to his very bloated, self-image and megalomania, so to say. And so the contrast is very, stark. So the rise and the fall of the house of Hyder, it had to have these two elements. The first part from 1760 to 82, which is about 22 years of Hyder Ali and 17 years of Tipu Sultan. But as you said, Hyder was no less, cruel, like all other contemporary kings and wars of those times. In Malabar, particularly in northern Kerala, the kind of atrocities that were meted out even by Hyder, they're quite bone-chilling when you read those. He actually sits there in Malabar, giving away 5 rupees for every Nair head that is brought to him. And 3 rupees for every Nair woman who is brought for his harem.
So these 4 rupees for an old Nair head.
Yeah, 4 rupees, slightly concession for a old Nair head. Yeah, it is. But maybe the times were different. Pre-modern times, violence being so closely associated with kingship, all that is there. But still, the cruelty becomes a lot more when it comes to Tipu Sultan.
You described Tipu as a historian's enigma. What kind of a person was he, and what kind of a state did he want to build? We have his manifesto and the Sarkare Kudadad, but on the other hand, he also wants to create a global kind of state linked to the global economy. So what kind of a state did he have in mind?
So there too, the difference between the father and son is so stark. Now, the father knew that, he's a usurper of a Hindu kingdom with majority Hindu subjects, of a Maharaja who is actually his benefactor, and people would not take it lightly if he completely dispensed with the Maharaja. So he put the Wadiyar as a puppet on the throne, and he was only his very obedient servant. All trophies of war would be submitted to his feet. Farmans and orders would go in the name of the Maharaja, but everybody knew where the true power lay. Now, once a Maharaja died, some little infant would be put on the throne as a puppet. By the time that guy, grew up and got a mind of his own, And if he tried to protest, then very surreptitiously one glass of milk would go to his chambers, and next morning the Maharaja is found dead. So, and then another charade of another young boy who's put on the throne. But he kept the farce of having this puppet ruler on the throne. But when it came to Tipu, he thought there was no need to continue with this charade. So let's do away with the Vodayars. The queen also, Rani Lakshmi Ammanni, she was put in house arrest. And he took over the kingdom not as a Sarvadhikari or dictator, but as a supreme ruler. And Mysore itself changed its name. It became Sarkare Khudadad, or the God-given kingdom. And the Islamization of Mysore was almost a complete project, where Persian replaced Kannada and also Marathi, which was used in the Vodayar court. The names of places were all changed. Calicut became Farrukhabad, and then Mysore became Nazarabad. So every city's name was changed. Persian on coins that he started minting. And he said, this is my state which I have got, so there's no need to give obeisance to a puppet ruler. But in the process, I mean, it is due credit to his vision that he sent these emissaries to different parts of the world. Most Indian powers would deal with the British or the French in Madras or in Pondicherry. Now, when it came to executing those contracts, the British and the French said, we don't have the power, it's with the supreme ruler, either in England or in Paris. So Tipu saw the need that why deal with these local guys? Let's directly send a mission abroad. So I think among the earliest rulers who sent a mission abroad to the Emperor Louis XVI's court, asking for help against the British. Of course, he did it at a very wrong time when the French Revolution was just brewing, and 2 years later, Louis XVI is beheaded along with Mary Antoinette. So it was wrong timing, but at least this man had that vision to send people there. And later, of course, to ally with them on religious grounds, also sent emissaries to the Ottoman Caliph, to the Turkey Sultan, to the Zaman Shah of Afghanistan's Durrani family, all of these appealing to their religious sentiments to come together to form a larger Muslim brotherhood against the British. So, and creating a vast market for Mysorean products, sandalwood and ivory and all these things, pearls and other things that were so famous in Mysore. He created a large, market for that, particularly in the Middle East, in Muscat, in Oman, and all these places where he sent emissaries. So on the one hand, of course, you have this side of Tipu, which is a global kind of aspirations where he's trying to establish himself. And in all of this, Dr. Nagesh, the driving force was also this seeking legitimacy. He knew very well that he was not a legitimate ruler. The father may have usurped the kingdom, but that usurpation was not hereditary. It didn't automatically mean the son also got it. So constantly you see in the letters which I have quoted of his, he's asking the Mughal, Shah Alam, that I am the true ruler, Badshah, so please give me legitimacy. But the Shah Alam himself was under the Maratha Mahadji Shinde's control, so he couldn't do much about that. So he sends an emissary all the way to the Ottoman Caliph, saying, I am the true, and their faith comes in, where I am the true Muslim ruler of Hindustan as a whole, because I have done all of this, and there you wear all your, cruelties as badges of honor. I have broken so many temples, I have broken so many churches, I have killed so many infidels. I am the one who's the defender of the true faith, and so please give me the legitimacy and the certification to be the king of Mysore. And the Caliph actually sends that approval also. And so only then he declares himself as the Badshah of Mysore. He even gets a big octagonal throne constructed for himself. Unfortunately for him, he's never able to sit on it, because by the time it's constructed, he's already been killed in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. So very, very contrasting figures, both father and son, and particularly Tipu's global ambitions. At the same time, this local constant assertion for legitimacy, even matrimonial alliances with the Nizam's family. And the Nizam rebuffs him, saying, though you may be Muslim, you're of low class, you're not a royal breed, so we will not get married into your family. So you see that even in some of the war treaties with the Marathas, constantly he's like, can you give me this title of Nawab Bahadur? So I want a title to myself so that I can claim my legitimacy. You see that very, very insecure man about his own, position, which comes through very clearly in several of his own writings.
The controversial nature of his reign especially is dominated by 3 or 4 incidents during his reign. The case of the Mandyam Iyengas, the Mangalore campaign and the Long March of the Christians, and then the Coorg campaign and the Devati Paramba incident. And especially what we'd love to hear is about his Malabar campaign, the Padayotam.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, people could argue that these were pre-modern times and violence is a part of kingship, no doubt. But one must also acknowledge that some were more violent than the others. And while I said Hyder himself was violent, there one could still dismiss it with the fact that, any political opponent, someone who you see as a rebel, you are eliminating them. That is still understandable. But here, in Tipu's case, very clearly his own writings, and there's no scope for ambiguity because in his own writings he mentions the need to eliminate kafirs, infidels. So the manifesto of his Sarkar-e Khudadad that he says very clearly that the objective of my government is to wipe away the false religions and establish the true faith. The inscription on his sword also has that, that this sword will drench itself in the blood of kafirs. So the very clear distinction that it was not just political campaign against rebels, but actually identity-based, attacks, which is what a genocide is all about. As the Geneva Convention defines genocide as targeted attacks on people based on their identity, their race, their color, or whatever. So in that case, we have several of these, bone-chilling incidents that he does. The Mandyam Iyengar case that you mentioned. On the eve of Deepavali, on Naraka Chaturdashi, 700 men, women, and children of the Mandyam Iyengar community, they are ruthlessly put to death in Srirangapatna at a temple called the Lakshmi Narasimha temple. They are actually all called for a feast, Diwali feast, and while they are in the midst of eating, the doors of the temple are closed and elephants are let loose and they are trampled to death. And that trauma lives with that community even today after 250 years. It's not some old, torture which is forgotten in history books. Members of that community of Mandyam Iyengars to this day do not celebrate Diwali on the day that all of us in the rest of India celebrate. They observe it as a day of mourning or Shraddh. And maybe a week later or something is when they celebrate it. And why did he do this to the Mandyam Iyengars? Now there were two ministers of the deposed Wadayar family, of the Maharani especially, Lakshmi Ammanni, who was, put in house arrest, but within prison she used to send these emissaries to the British in Madras asking for help against Tipu. And those letters were carried by these two men called Tirumal Rao and Narayan Rao, and they belonged to the Mandyam Iyengar community. Now, Tipu and even Hyder had tried every way to catch them, but they somehow, gave him a slip and they ran away somewhere. Now, because you could not catch them, the brunt of that is borne by the entire community. Children and women, I'm sure, had nothing to do with this treachery that those two people were believed to have done. But you wanted to teach a lesson to the entire community and also subjugate them culturally because you're doing it on the day which is auspicious, which is a festival day for them. Similarly with the Christians, the Canara Christians in Mangalore. Now, when the British attack Mangalore during the Second Anglo-Mysore War, the apprehension was a lot of the clergy there, the Christian clergy collaborated with the British against Mysore. So Hyder was also quite angry with them and so was Tipu. And so to take revenge against that, they attack once again. But the clergy realizes they are Portuguese, so they realize that before he attacks, let us run away to Goa. So they run away somehow and are remained unattacked. But the brunt of that is borne by the poor Canara Christians who are probably farmers and laborers and has nothing to do with politics. So upwards of 60 to 70,000 of these Canara Christians dragged all the way from Mangalore to Srirangapatna, a course of about 300 kilometers, tied to the feet of elephants sometimes made to walk for miles together. Pregnant women also being made to march, many of them delivering babies on the way, some dying, no proper way for a funeral too, and wolves and jackals and dogs are feeding on their corpses. In fact, near Mangalore there is a lake called the Nettaru Kere. Nettaru in Tulu means blood, a blood-filled lake. So that was the torture that was unleashed. And the Archdiocese in Mangalore has a archival record of all of this. There's a Kannada manuscript too called the Barkur manuscript, which details the memoirs and the troubles that these victims faced, and they had to come to Srirangpatna and be asked to convert. And if you don't convert, your lips and nose is cut off and you're made to paraded on donkeys and so on. So they faced that. Almost 27 churches in Mangalore and Canara, South and North Canara were destroyed, including the Milagres church, which is so famous in Mangalore, which was rebuilt later. Similarly, the Kodavas in neighboring Coorg, they also constantly pushed back against Mysorean invasions. And both Hyder and Tipu found it very difficult to subjugate both the Kodavas there and the Nayars and the Thiyas in Malabar, North Kerala. Now for the Kodavas, again you have a very chilling kind of letter that Tipu writes to his commander, Zainul Abidin Shustri, where he says, in Coorg, not only the living prisoners, but even the dead need to be converted. Dead bodies being circumcised and converted, so to say. And these, as I said, there is no scope for ambiguity interpretation. These are straight from the horse's mouth. And 12th of December 1785, to this day, the Kodavas observe that as a martyr's day, because on that day, this meadow there called Devati Param, just like he did with the Mandya Mayangars, a false sense of security. You invite all of them saying, we are going to have negotiations with you, we are going to make peace, so come unarmed. And they believe him and they come there, and the minute they come there, they are encircled and all of them are killed. So the lot of these Kodava oral literature, there's this Pattole Palame, a very famous book written much later of oral stories. They also talk about these atrocities, and he's quite a hated figure there, as he is in parts of northern Kerala. The five principalities of the Malabar, Chirakkal and Kottayam, Vatakara and Palghat and Kozhikode, faced unspoken tortures, especially Kozhikode, the place you come from, where he himself says something like 4 lakh people being converted. And there are lots and lots of documentary evidence of the times and also later, missionaries and other Jesuits and others who've written of what Calicut, the people of Calicut faced during that time. So I think, history also offers that space where we recount some of these horrors of the past, not with the idea that we need to, pin that blame of that on any communities today or whatever, but just as a space where there is sense of healing. Now, finding justice for a crime 200 years back is not possible, but at least you find a closure. But denying of it is adding, I think, insult to injury, which is what we've been doing all the time when it comes to writing our own past.
But the figures, the 4 lakh Nayars who were converted, or the 8,000 temples which were destroyed, the 80,000, all of these figures have been contested. Muhibul Hasan, for example, talks about how they must have been exaggerated because he was trying to prove to the Sultan of Turkey that he was a good Muslim. And
isn't that itself a problem? That where crimes are a virtue, that you have to exaggerate that I killed so many to show that I'm a good guy. That itself is a problem, right? Why would he want to exaggerate? Of course, a lot of court historians would exaggerate what their rulers did. But if you're using that as a badge of honor to be called a good Muslim ruler, I think there itself there is a problem.
The other
numbers don't matter. Numbers don't matter. Maybe it's 40,000, maybe it's 20,000, maybe it's 10. But the fact that this thought itself was there, that you are targeting people on their identity, on their faith, and trying to destroy that itself is potent enough to be, thought uncomfortable in today's world.
The other side is that if you look at the British records, for example, that they wanted to demonize Tipu Sultan. So how can we trust their records?
No, if you actually see, both Hyder and Tipu were this strong bastion against the British. They were brave soldiers, no two words about that. Now, it took the British almost 35 years to subjugate Mysore, which itself speaks a lot about the resistance that they offered. Now, 4 Anglo-Mysore wars were fought between 1767 and 1799, 2 of which were under the leadership of Hyder Ali, and the 3rd and 4th under Tipu. Now, in both the first and the second Mysore war, Mysore scripted unprecedented success. The British had just come out from the battles of Plassey and Buxar, invincible, that they are the superheroes. That whole balloon was punctured in the first Anglo-Mysore War, where Hyder literally chased them to the very gates of Madras, and he made them sign a very, very humiliating treaty also, which ended the war. And the shockwaves went all the way to London. This was discussed in the British Parliament. The board of directors were so, angry as to who is this person from Mysore who's causing this terrible harm to us. And this success continued in the second Anglo-Mysore War too, where Colonel Bailey, one of the people, using the Mysorean rockets, the kind of defeat that was inflicted on him by Hyder and, of course, Tipu under his leadership was also unprecedented. You had Sir Hector Munro, who was the hero of Battle of Buxar, and Plassey actually throwing away all his ammunition in a tank in Kanchipuram and running to save his life to Madras. So, and probably even the French write very, very, glorifyingly, saying nowhere in India have the British faced this quantum of a defeat as they did during the first two Anglo-Mysore wars. So Hyder had that kind of a strategy and leadership. But after his death, the two wars that Tipu fought independently, they were completely disastrous. The third Anglo-Mysore war, he loses half his kingdom. He has to pay a war indemnity of about 3.5 crores and give away two of his sons, Abdul Khalik and Moizuddin, as hostages till the time the British get that recovery of that money. And in the fourth Anglo-Mysore war, he was actually killed in his fort in Srirangapatna, being encircled, Richard Wellesley, when he comes there. So the person who actually defeated the British and gave them such a tough time, Hyder, he's not being demonized by the British as much. In fact, all the British writers, whether it is Mark Wilkes, whether it is Bowring, whether it is Buchanan, all these people, his contemporaries and later, they all are much in awe of his military strategy. In fact, Mark Wilkes says there's not a single political mistake that Hyder does. And they're quite favorable to him because he was not such a religious bigot, according to some of them. He allowed all religions to thrive as long as his power was in place. That's all mattered. Who followed what was their headache. So the demonization, they should have done more of Hyder than of someone whom they defeated and killed. After you have killed them, what exaggeration, and they don't owe an explanation to anybody as to why they attacked Mysore or why they killed him. So I don't see, there can't be smoke without fire. All historical records of the times can have exaggeration. That way Tipu's own court chronicler, Mir Hussain Ali Kirmani, some of his claims are also exaggerated. But there is a lot of truth behind all that smoke of exaggeration. So I don't buy that argument that someone who's been vanquished, why would the British go so hammer and tongs to villainize him? In fact, after his death, and in the epilogue, I describe in detail how he became almost like a cult figure in London. People were very, very, curious to know the curious case of Tipu Sultan as to who is this man who gave us such a bloody fight for so long. And so paintings and exhibitions in London galleries, plays started getting written in his name. The Moonstone. Tipu's Tiger. So there was also this, in his bedroom after he was killed, they found this contraption called a Tipu's Tiger, which was a big one, which it moved with a crank and the whole apparatus rotated like this. And there was a tiger which was feasting on a British soldier. And apparently when it turned, there were shrieks of the man and howls of the tiger. And this man used to listen to that every day to give him inspiration to fight the British. Now they found this in his bedroom and they took it all the way back to London, being quite amazed. And in fact, I also quote, very unwittingly, they placed it in a library, and the librarian actually says, in the middle of the day when the scholars were deep in study, by itself this device would start screaming and howling and shrieking. It was almost like the ghost of Tipu Sultan had entered that. And the librarian writes that, thank God it went into disrepair and nobody tried to repair it afterwards. It still now sits in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Almost muted like its owner, but there to show, like this is the toy that he played with every day. So the fascination with him, all his letters, he was so well read. The problem with Tipu was he was extremely well read. So he wrote and wrote and wrote copiously in Persian. Now, all these letters, his dream registers, his commandments to various people, everything was translated and kept to understand, what this mind was all about. Hyder was illiterate because of his troubled childhood. The only literary achievement of his life was to learn to sign the first alphabet of his name.
But he knew a lot of languages.
He knew a lot of languages, yeah. Hindustani, Tamil, Kannada, Marathi, Telugu, even a little bit of French and all of that.
But on the other side, there are all the endowments that Tipu made to the temples, and especially the case of the Sringeri Mutt, where the Marathas came and plundered it, and it was Tipu who came to the rescue of the Shankaracharya of Sringeri.
Yeah. There is a little bit of nuance and context in that too. So it was in the Third Anglo-Mysore War when the Marathas invade Mysore, and that is when a contingent of the Patvardhans of the Maratha Confederacy, they come, and the irregulars in the army, those who don't rely on full-time army pay, they are irregulars who survive only on loot that they get in the army, called the Pindaris. Now, these Pindaris were the one who go to Sringeri, which is the seat of the Shankaracharya, one of the 4 important mutts that Adi Shankara established, and they plunder it. Even the deity, Sharda Devi, is vandalized. Almost something like 60 lakhs or something is taken away from that mutt. And the Shankaracharya at that time sits in a fast unto death as protest against this. That sends shivers back in Pune to the Peshwa court. And I've documented it from the Peshwa Daftar in Pune in Marathi, where they chastise the Patvardhans and ask them to ensure that all this money is returned. And they write apology letters to the Shankaracharya saying, we are very, very sorry for what happened. This was an inadvertent mistake. This is not part of our state policy. We will give you money to, rebuild your mutt and so on. Now, at that time, Tipu sends a letter to the Shankaracharya saying, don't take money from them. I will give you money to, re-establish the mutt. But truth be said, both father and son had a long, period of writing very, very conciliatory and respectful letters to the Shankaracharya right from the beginning. But in this case, I would see this also as a case of realpolitik, where you snatch a march over your opponent. Before he gives you money, I'll give you so you don't, take his money. And in return, what is interesting is I'll give you the money. In return, please pray for my long life and victory. And actually, the Shankaracharya does it. He does a Sahasra Chandi Homam and Shata Chandi Japa and all that for Tipu's victory against the Marathas. So it's a very complicated time period where everyone is, trying to gain the maximum from the other. And many of these other endowments that you talk of, I've actually documented the entire list of endowments. Most of them actually started during the time of Hyder. Now, even in Guruvayur, here in Kerala, he gave a grant to Guruvayur is also mentioned. No, but at the same time, we also know that he came very close to demolishing the temple there. And in fact, the locals somehow got to know, and the deity was taken away to this Ambalapura, where it was temporarily kept. And I think even to this day, that place that gave Guruvayurappan the temporary refuge is still worshipped. Now, it boggles me. How do you first want to demolish the temple and then also give a grant to it? These two things cannot happen simultaneously. So, if you dig deeper, there is some guy called Hydros Kutti, who is actually a Chela, one of the converted Nayars during Hyder's time, who still has some affinity for his parent religion perhaps, and he tries to save the temple before Tipu comes and attacks it. So many of these grants were like that. I mean, they carried on as legacy grants, or somebody in the establishment tried to somehow save it or not take all the details back to Srirangpatna so that he did not know about it. And another feature of Tipu was he was extremely superstitious. I think the kind of life he led of uncertainty, every day there's a war, every day something is happening, everybody ganging up against you. So he started more and more getting, addicted to divination mechanisms, astrology. He was well versed in astrology himself. He could cast his own jatakam and read it.
On the day of his death, he was looking
into
that
also,
pot of oil.
He's looking at a pot of oil so that all the bad omens are, taken away. So he was very, very superstitious, and probably, some of these, we know there is some dosha, so you do some parihara, you give this grant to some temple, do some puja, then you will be rid. So somebody who's so uncertain, anything, to save my life, I will do anything. So most of these grants also come as part of this. And if you see the list of grants, after the Third Anglo-Mysore War, which is 1791, the grants just stop. But after that, all the money from the temples is confiscated, the lands are confiscated, because you have to pay war indemnity to the British, 3.5 crores, which was much more than the state budget, which was about 2 crores. So how do you raise this money? So you confiscate all of this to give it to them. And so there is a lot of, and in Melkote, I spoke to a very senior scholar there. I asked him, like, in large parts of South Karnataka, if he was such a bigot, why do temples still stand? I mean, everything should have been demolished. Though,
All the Ranganatha Swami, all the Ranga temples.
yes. So, in fact, Rice, who wrote the Gazetteer of Mysore, says at the death of Tipu Sultan, there were only 3 to 4 temples in the whole of Mysore where daily pujas were actually being conducted because there was no money to do those. Now, but there are temples still existing. So this man told me, so for a man who is given to so much superstition, some astrologer said, your kingdom will remain eternal if you don't demolish 3 kind of idols or deities. And in Kannada it said, Yedda Kallu, a standing stone, a Bidda Kallu, or a fallen down stone, and a Gunda Kallu, or a round stone. So Yedda Kallu was this Chaluva Narayana Swami, standing idol. That literally covers almost all the deities, they're either standing, sleeping, or sitting in a round fashion, which was the Nanjangud Shivalinga. And Ranganatha, who is the lying, god. So in fact, in large parts of southern Karnataka, even to this day, people started putting this Ranga, Biligiri Ranga, there is Hema Ranga, Kalyana Ranga, Magadi Ranga. This Ranga added, the main deity there is not Ranganatha at all. There's someone else. They'll put a Ranga in front of it, and probably this armies go there, oh, this is Ranganatha, don't demolish it. Almost, I shouldn't say that, but used as a scarecrow to ensure that is safe. So all these kind of things had to be done for the Hindus of the time to save their temples, to save what they had. Those can't be seen as evidences of his benevolence and so on. But as I said, those reverential letters to the Shankaracharya is something that are part of the archives.
I think we are running out of time, but we need to talk about his achievements also, especially his market reforms and agricultural reforms.
Yeah.
And I'd like you, I think we only have about 5 minutes before we let the audience ask questions about his military hardware, especially the rockets that were far superior to the European ones.
Very true. So it's usually said he invented the rockets. That is not true because rockets were already in use. In fact, even the person, Agni Bana, it is called Agni Bana even in the epics and later this one. And the people who were handling the rockets in Mysore, they were called Banadar, someone who used the Banas. So even during the Wadiyars, the Marathas, they all used rockets. But I think Hyder and Tipu particularly improvised on it quite a lot. So the paper casing or the wooden casing was replaced with iron. And in those days, India produced one of the best iron and steel in the whole world. So the iron was, casing was there, and that gave the propellant, the thing that pushes the rocket. It was more densely packed in that iron, and so the range and also the height to which it could go, the thrust with which it could go was much more. Almost 1 kilometer range of these rockets. 50%, 100% better than what the British were using. And that's why these rockets became very important in the scripting of Mysore's victories, as I mentioned earlier in the first and second Anglo-Mysore wars. Now, a lot of agriculture reforms that he did, particularly control of farms taken away and given in many cases to the peasants. There was a side thing that you wanted more revenue. That is perfectly fine. The cultivable land itself increased in Mysore because I think constantly the need was, I need to raise more revenue to pay the British indemnity. So interest-free loans given to farmers, plows and all of that, lot of agricultural reforms that he brought about. And all said and done, the military strength of Mysore, which had got so emasculated during the time of the Wadiyars just before the usurpation, both Hyder and Tipu certainly, gave that thrust to the Mysore's army, militarily and economically. We also spoke of how he tried to create a global market for Mysorean products. So these certainly do count among his achievements. But at the end of the day, I think the legacy of a man is also judged by the social report card. Right, and what all were done to people who did not belong to his world view. What did you do with them? So there it is a very troublesome social report card. And as I said, this is not some 200-year-old, 300-year-old story which we can forget. That intergenerational trauma, the intergenerational memory still exists with communities today. And that is why, the weaponization, especially by politics and politicians, creates all these schisms when it comes to talking and thinking about Tipu Sultan.
There are a whole lot of other questions that I would love to ask. Huge books, lots of questions. But now it's time for the members of the audience to ask questions. Before you ask questions, we all have our opinions and positions about Tipu Sultan. Tipu Sultan is very polarizing. So please, because of respect for others and their need to ask questions, please confine your questions just to questions. Please formulate them in as few words as possible in 1 or 2 sentences.
Can you say a few words? It's me here.
Oh, yeah.
Can you say a few words about the French connection that he had? The influence of the French paintings or the automata, the musical automata, all those stuff. Thank you.
Constantly, being under the... and I think by the second half of the 18th century, a lot of Indian rulers, you had Martanda Varma here too, where he used the Dutch, support to modernize his army. Similarly, the French became part of the Mysorean army, and with their help, a lot of European technology came to him and to his son. And Tipu was always given to scientific temper, constantly looking for how microscopes worked, how various instruments worked. In the middle of battle, even William Kirkpatrick, who compiles all these letters, he says in the midst of a war, this man is asking his people to get him some microscope or a telescope, or get me silkworms and the science of sericulture, which is why Mysore silk became so popular thereafter. So his scientific temper and wanting to know about instruments and equipments was certainly very high.
So one question. Generally history, the way it is learnt in schools, it seems to be more of a Delhi-centric history, where the importance of what happens in other parts of the country is not known. Even being in South India, I have never read about the Battle of Kolachal. One. Second, you say Mughals and then you come to the British. The rule of the Marathas is hardly mentioned over there. And even in case of Tipu, the bad is being glorified, the good what he has done is somewhere in the dust. What do you think can be done to change this? Or you feel history in schools has a limitation to this when it is being in textbooks?
What to do to change it? I certainly agree with both your points. What to do to change it is to write more books and talk about it, which is what some of us are doing. And see, I think there are multiple perspectives in history. There's a good, there's a bad. It's a curious case indeed of this guy. So he's a historian's enigma, where there are contradictory stands on various issues. So I think getting a holistic view of the person, the good, the bad, the ugly, I think that is what is important, because till now only one version is seen. He's a great freedom fighter. Now anybody who fought the British at that time need not be by default a freedom fighter, because at that time the same people also say there was nothing called an India. There was no concept of India till the British came and unified us. So if there was no India, what India are you fighting for? You can't have it both ways. So you were a brave soldier, but you were fighting for your own honor, your own kingdom, just as he was fighting with someone, the others, Marathas, Nizam of the time. And he was taking French help to defeat the British. So if by a stroke of luck, if Tipu had won, today we would be having this conversation in French, because India would have become a French colony. With all these Zaman Shah and others whom he invited, he very clearly says, invade India, a 2-year plan. In the first year, the whole of North India is flushed out of Kafirs. The second year, the whole of South India is flushed out of Kafirs. Then we meet midway, and then we divide the subcontinent among ourselves after declaring it an Islamic caliphate. So we would have either been a French colony or an Islamic republic. So this freedom fighter, those are very modern terms. If you say there is no nation state, there is no freedom fighter also. Very brave soldier, I'm never discounting that. But to extrapolate that as the first freedom fighter of India is a little stretch of imagination.
And the reversal of the north and south, I think Vikram is already doing that, because Tipu is often described as the Aurangzeb of the south, and Vikram describes Aurangzeb as the Tipu of the north.
I want to know if the Mysorean army under Hyder Ali and Tipu, the majority were Hindus or Muslims? If the majority were Hindus, with all the atrocities perpetrated on Hindu community, why the Hindu did not revolt?
So that's a question which goes all the way even to Jallianwala Bagh, right? I mean, General Dyer ordered the firing, but who fired on their own Indian brethren? It were Indian soldiers. So just the fact that, I mean, they are on the pay of the ruler. The soldiers have little option to follow the rules and commands of the king. In the time of Hyder, at least the cabinet that was comprised of the top officials, there were a lot of Hindus in it. Now, under Tipu Sultan, slowly the numbers start dwindling. And especially after the Third Anglo-Mysore War, he completely starts distrusting the Hindus, especially the Brahmins. And so after that, even a very favorable biographer like Dennis Forrest, he says, incompetent people put in administration, in army and navy roles only by the virtue of their religion, not because they were competent enough to lead what they did. So that is also what led to the decay of his kingdom and his eventual fall. But yeah, it was a Hindu majority country, so obviously kingdom, so majority of even the soldiers would be Hindus, but that does not take away from the fact as to who was giving the directives to these atrocities.
So we have a question which is from Vishwanath sir. Demonizing Tipu in the part of Sangh Parivar agenda to engage in historical revenge to meet their political ends. You may be a tool. How do you react?
I have nothing to do with politics, so people can have their agendas left or the right. My role as a historian is to illuminate the archive, illuminate the documents. Now, 150 pages of this book of 900 is on footnotes, bibliography, and sources. In history, everything you say, you need to have a citation, you need to have a reference. So, as long as there is a reference, that is the truth as is available to me as of today. Someone else can further research that and write something else which refutes those citations. To attribute political motives, I mean, I'm sure, as you rightly said at the beginning, history is a minefield and a battlefield today. So people are constantly going to weaponize it this way or the other. Someone inadvertently can become a tool, cannot become a tool. If that is all that a historian needs to think, you need to shut shop and not write about anything, because every work of history today is divisive. Every work of history gets politicized. Everything is polarizing. The scrutiny of the work is how authentic it is, what is the fidelity to sources, that the historian is referring to. The rest of it is political, surround sound and noise in which I have zero interest.
I think there's just one more question.
Hi, my name is Ajay. I'm coming from Wayanad, and my town is named as Sultan Bateri, which basically means Sultan's Battery. And the old name was Ganapati Vattam. So my question is, what your take on the idea that the Jain temples that were said to be destroyed by the Tipu Sultan were actually destroyed by the upper caste agenda, that because at the same time the temples of ideals like Ganapati and Vishnu were not destroyed at the same time. So in our place we have this idea that the Jain temples that were actually said to be destroyed by Tipu were not actually destroyed by Tipu. So what's your take on that?
No, I mean, it can be an idea, but as I said in the previous answer, where is the source? What is the documentation for that? Having an idea is one thing, but backing that idea with fact is another. If there is there a documented source, or someone has written a memoir, either contemporaneous, or is there some kind of oral study which is there, oral folklore which talks about that? Unless that is there, then I don't know if that can be taken as a source in history.
Obviously, there are a lot of more questions there, but there isn't time for further questions. But all your questions can be answered if you go to this particular very voluminous, heavily documented book that is full of fascinating facts and spellbindingly written. So, Vikram Sampath, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nagesh. Thank you all, and thank you to Mathrubhumi for being such a wonderful host. Thank you.